Today I want to talk with you about the difference between sole proprietorships and LLCs. This is a question that I get asked about all the time by my clients and non-clients alike. People want to know, is this something I should do when I'm starting my business? I probably answer this question 3, 4, 5 times a week. So I thought I would do a video to walk you through, kind of update some of the changes that have happened in the past several years. It's been a while since I've done a video on this exact topic, but hopefully this will help you to understand if you're on the fence, you're starting a business and you're not quite sure whether an LLC or a sole proprietorship is right for you. Hopefully this is going to help you to make that decision. My name is Jim Hart. I am a trademark and intellectual property attorney. I practice in North Carolina. I'm the owner of the Hart Law Firm, and I am really out of shape when it comes to this stuff. I think that's what happens when you don't do a video for, I don't know, it's probably been like 8 months. You start forgetting how to do them. And so I need to get back into the swing of how to do them. First of all, I'll tell you, I am sorry about this background. We are in a transition stage and I am moving to a new office. And so this is kind of part of what's going on. This is what I got to work with right now. On the flip side, I don't have dogs to worry about because there's no dogs here. Although some of you might miss the dogs or the cats. One of the cats died. That's kind of sad. And now we got a train going by. Can you hear that? So we're going to talk about the differences between those two type of business entities today, as well as some other business entities that you might be able to choose. And the purpose of today is to really help you figure out whether forming a limited liability company is the right choice for you and your business as you are just getting started. Or maybe if you've already been in business for a while and you're like, you know what, I really think that maybe I should have thought about that LLC thing, but yeah, maybe I should do that. That's what we're going to talk about today. So let's just kind of jump in. If you're new to the channel here, please consider subscribing. We'd love to have you. Back when I was in high school, two of my best friends, they started I'll affectionately call it a landscaping company. They were mowing lawns for a bunch of people. I'm fairly confident they did not set up an LLC for that business. They just basically went around and mowed lawns and collected cash, and they had a customer list and they went certain days and did the whole thing. And they kept records. They actually had a pretty legitimate business, and I was always really jealous of them because they did like 2 or 3 hours of work in the morning and they were always done by the afternoon. That is how you start a sole proprietorship. You don't have to do anything. In the case of if there's 2 people, you would actually be starting a partnership. So a partnership is basically the same as a sole proprietorship, but there's 2 people instead of 1 person. Some of the main benefits of a sole proprietorship are it's easy. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to file anything with the state. Well, that's not necessarily true. You don't have to file any documents with the state or pay any fees to the state to tell them that you are starting your business. You just do it. Now, the exception there's really 2, maybe 3 exceptions. The biggest exception is if you want to be doing business as a certain name that's not your personal name, then you're going to need to file what's called a DBA, which is another way to say a fancy legal way of saying a doing business as, or in some states it's called a fictitious name. In other states it might be called a trade name. Depending on where you're located, it might be called something different, but every single state, except for maybe Kansas, I believe, will allow you to file a DBA or a trade name or a fictitious name to let them know that you are doing business under a certain name. And the filing fees for that are usually minor, like 20, 30, 50 bucks, something like that. They're not huge. In some states, like in Florida, you have to actually publish in a newspaper to show that you are actually starting business under that name. A DBA can be owned by you as a personal individual, or it can be owned by your partnership, or it could even be owned by an LLC. So if you start the LLC as one thing, but then you want to form a DBA or have it be known by something else, you can do it that way. So that's one thing you may need to consider as you are starting your business. Do you need to have a DBA filed with the state? If so, you want to make sure you take care of that. The other thing that you really need to be concerned about when you're starting up a sole proprietorship or a partnership is if you are in a regulated industry, if you're like a barber, an esthetician, or maybe a nail salon, or maybe you're in a professional services business like an accountant or an attorney, obviously, or if you are, maybe doing something like food service or something like that, you may need to have a license. You may need to register with the state to let them know that you are actually operating that business and meet the credentials to operate that business. But that's basically it in terms of a sole proprietorship. There's not really a whole lot else you need to do. You're going to need to keep track of all your income and expenses, but then you're going to file that on a Schedule C with your federal tax return. So you don't even need to worry about filing a separate tax return. You do need to be aware, however, that you're going to have to pay self-employment taxes on any income you earn from that business. Now, that's not revenue, it's income. So income is revenue minus expenses. I know some people get confused by that, but that's something that you just need to be aware of. The other thing, with the sole proprietorship, just like you don't need to file an initial document with the state letting them know that you're starting your business, you don't need to file any annual reports with the state letting them know the status of your business. So those are some of the pros. It's easy. You can do it. You really don't have to do anything except for if you're in a regulated industry or if you want to use some sort of trade name or doing business as with regards to your business. So it's fairly simple to get started. Now, you are, in a case of a sole proprietorship, you are personally responsible for the debts of your business. So that is enough for most people to push them into setting up an LLC, but that is a big con of setting up a sole proprietorship. Now, if you're in a partnership, it almost gets worse than that because you are responsible not only for the debts of the business, but you're responsible for those debts regardless of whether or not you incurred those debts or your partner incurred those debts. So if your partner made a bunch of mistakes and incurred a bunch of debts or hurt somebody or something happened with the business and your business gets sued because of what your partner did, then you could still be personally liable for all the debts of the business, especially if your partner absconds and moves overseas or something and can't be found. You're going to be responsible for the debts of the business. So those are the main cons of operating a sole proprietorship or a partnership. It may be harder to raise capital if you are a founder or you're starting to build a startup and you want to raise capital at some point. Maybe having a sole proprietorship or even a partnership is not going to be the best option. In addition, if you're looking to raise capital maybe through getting money from a bank, or you want to make sure you're looking as professional as possible in the eyes of your clients or customers, then again, having a sole proprietorship or a partnership maybe is not the best option, which leads us to the other option, which is what we will call a limited liability company. Now, that's also known as an LLC. That's how most people know it. So basically what an LLC is, it's exactly what I said. It's a limited liability company. It is an entity that is separate and apart from your business entity. That didn't make any sense. It is an entity separate and apart from you as an individual person. So a sole proprietorship is like you and the business are like this. With an LLC, you've got individual on this side and business on this side. You're two completely separate entities. So does that make sense? Hopefully that makes sense. If you got a question, leave a comment below. I check comments about once a week and try to respond to as many as possible. So feel free to comment. I need a quick sip of water. Or agua. It's a little late in the day, so I'm not drinking coffee. I know a lot of you like me for my coffee mugs, but we're gonna go with the Yeti water today. It's refreshing, I tell you what. Love that. Pros. The biggest pro is going to be that your personal assets are protected. Now I'm going to put an asterisk next to that because the big issue there that you need to be aware of is that they are protected provided you follow some rules and some guidelines. And we're going to talk about those here in just a minute. But that's the biggest thing. The other main benefit of an LLC is it's much more flexible than a corporation. So LLCs were started as a legal entity, I believe, in Wyoming back in the 70s or something. An LLC is very flexible. You have total control over how the LLC works and how it's run, just like you would as if you were a sole proprietorship. So that's a really nice thing. Another one of the main benefits of having an LLC is that you have the choice of how you want to be taxed. So with a sole proprietorship, you're stuck with basically paying self-employment taxes and reporting your income and expenses on Schedule C. With an LLC, you can still do that. But if your business grows over time and you decide to hire employees and staff and other things, and you want to be paid much more like an owner as opposed to just an employee of the business, you can elect to be taxed as an S corporation or even a C corporation if that makes sense for you. And the nice thing about that is you can actually save some money on taxes once your income hits a certain threshold. But you don't have that option if you're a sole proprietorship. We've talked a lot about some of the main benefits of an LLC. There's obviously some drawbacks, or everybody will be filing these things. So the main drawbacks are you must file documents with the state. And when you file documents with the state, you're going to have to pay fees to the state. So depending on what state you are in, this may or may not be an inexpensive or expensive thing to do. So certain states like New York, California, Massachusetts, these are states where it can actually be very expensive to form an LLC, be very burdensome to form an LLC. But in other states, it's not so much. Sometimes in some states, the fees can be as low as, $50, and some states don't even have an annual reporting requirement that you need to follow. It just depends on the state where you're at, so you need to do some research on that and figure that out. I actually prepared a course on how to set up an LLC that's got a spreadsheet with all the requirements for all 50 states. I'll leave a link in the description to that so you can check that out if that's something you're interested in figuring out. So you're going to have those initial fees and costs associated with setting up the LLC. Obviously, if you hire a lawyer, those are going to be additional fees. You're going to have to hire a registered agent. Those are additional fees. So there's going to be fees associated with setting up your business as an LLC. In addition, in most states, not every state, but in most states, you're going to need to file annual reports. In some states, you're going to do biannual reports, which means you have to file a report every other year. In other states, like I said before, you don't have to file a report at all. Some states require a franchise tax return in lieu of an annual report. So there's all sorts of different requirements depending on where you live and where you're operating the business. And that's one thing I will say, I've talked about this in some other videos, but you want to set up this LLC in the state where you live. Don't go run into Nevada or Wyoming or New Mexico or Delaware or something like that if you don't live there, especially without talking to a lawyer first. There might be some reasons why you might want to do that, but chances are 99% of the time you want to form that LLC in the state where you actually live. If you want to, you can have the LLC taxed just like you would be taxed as a sole proprietorship, but what most people do is they want to take advantage of some of the tax benefits that could come with choosing to be taxed in a different way with that LLC. And so if you elect to be taxed as an S corporation, for example, you're going to need to file a separate tax return for that. The only time you're going to file a tax return that's just going to go with your 1040 and you're going to include your income and expenses on a Schedule C is if it is a sole proprietorship or if you have an LLC that's going to be taxed as a pass-through entity sole proprietorship. Then in those cases, you're going to just include your income on Schedule C, which is the easiest way to do it, but it's also where you're going to pay the most in taxes. So one of the other updates that I haven't talked about in previous videos is I'm recording this, it is 2024. For the remainder of this year, if you're setting up an LLC now, you will have 90 days from the date that you set up that LLC to file a report called a Beneficial Ownership Information Form with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Unit of the federal government. And so that's something you have to do. It's mandatory. There can be civil and I think potentially criminal penalties if you don't. I talked about all those in the last video that I did on that. So that's something you need to be aware of. Also, if you make any changes to your LLC, like your address, the name, the ownership structure, anything like that, you may need to file additional reports with FinCEN in those cases. So that's another con. It's just more paperwork you need to deal with. You've got more paperwork, you've got more fees. Those are the main cons. I mean, that's what you're looking at. And you probably already knew that, or maybe you didn't, and that's why you're watching this video, and that's cool too. But the other thing that you need to be aware of, especially if you are forming the LLC because you want that limited liability protection that it affords, is you need to comply with all the requisite formalities. So like I said before, a sole proprietorship is like this. This is your business and your personal stuff. It's all intertwined. Now, I still recommend that you set up your own separate EIN and bank account for the business just to make things easy when it comes time to do your taxes. And if you ever get audited, it's going to make it easier, but you don't necessarily have to if you don't want to. But when you're doing an LLC, it is vitally important that you have two separate entities. If you're doing it like this and somebody sues you, then they could pierce that what's called corporate veil, and they could still get at your personal assets, and you don't want that to happen. So you definitely want to talk to a lawyer if you've got questions about how this should be handled. How do you make this decision? Should you form an LLC or should you just be a sole proprietor? And I talk to people about this, like I said, all the time. And there's a couple main factors that I ask my clients to consider before they make this decision. If you are, like, for example, operating a daycare and one of the kids could get hurt, or one of your employees could do something and hurt a child, there's a lot of liability associated with that. And there's a lot of regulations associated with that. And there's a lot of rules. So I would definitely have an LLC in that case. If you're operating a landscaping company and you've got workers that are working for you who could get hurt or could get bitten by a snake or cut themselves with some sort of lawn thing or something, you definitely want to have an LLC set up. But if you're like building websites for somebody and that's what you're doing, you're just being a freelancer and building websites, well, maybe you don't need to set up an LLC, but that's going to be your call. The other thing I will say about that is it is easier to set up an LLC when you're just getting started than it is going to be to set up an LLC, 6 months, 12 months, 2 years down the line once your business gets going, because then you're going to have to untangle everything and reset it up as an LLC. So if you're going to do it, you want to begin with the end in mind and think about where you want your business to be in 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now. And if you have a vision for a really big entity with employees and staff and lots of customers and clients, then maybe an LLC is the right choice. Along those lines, so if you are a high income earner, like an executive or a doctor, or you're stepping away from that business, maybe you're retired, semi-retired, and you're trying to start a new business, but you've got assets that you're living off of, and you're highly risk averse, you probably need to set up an LLC. The other main factor I would look at in terms of deciding whether or not an LLC is right for you is if you are a true startup or you're a founder and you're trying to build a company and your goal is to eventually one day, get investors for your business, and maybe not even one day, maybe this is something that you think is going to happen within the next, 3, 6, 9, 12 months, then you definitely want to have the appropriate legal entity in place. And in that situation, you may not even want an LLC. You may want to form a C corporation directly and potentially do it in Delaware if that's what you're looking to do. So there are situations where that might make sense. And then the last factor I would say is, like I said, again, if you're a freelancer, maybe doing freelance design work, writing, doing websites, things like that, and you're just basically taking in money and doing jobs and things like that, chances are you may not need an LLC. But if you're looking to take that freelance business and build it into something much bigger than you, where you're hiring employees and staff and contractors to do work for you, for your clients or customers, and there's a risk that they may mess something up, or your income may grow exponentially and you're going to want to get some tax benefits from forming that S corporation, then chances are an LLC might be the right option for you. All that is to say, all this stuff can change. Where you're at today, where you're going to be 6 months from now, this is all a very organic process for a lot of people. But if you'd like to learn more about how to set up an LLC, I'm going to put a video right there. It's going to teach you all the things you need to know to set up that LLC and get legally legit in no time flat. So thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Take care, folks. Bye-bye.